Hey, once again, thanks for joining everybody. We're going to get started right at 3. Got a couple more minutes, but we'll go ahead and get going right at 3. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I do hear a little bit of background noise. Can everyone just make sure that they are muted? That way we don't have any background noise during the presentation. Thank you. All right. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on this Tuesday afternoon. I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy as they are logging into this training webinar. I do want to go over a few housekeeping rules before we get started. I might talk a little fast during these, but that is just because we have a lot to cover today and a little bit of time. Perfect. So what we're going to do is I just want, just so you all know, this is a recorded webinar. Once we complete with today's training, we will send this webinar along with a feedback form to your inbox. You will also be able to find this webinar in the following ways, either on AZFBN's website. From myself personally, my contact information will be at the end of this webinar, or via your partnering food banks agency team. You may have noticed that you are muted for today's webinar, except for maybe some of you might have access. So I do ask that you please mute, so that way we eliminate background noise. This is to help us provide the best quality of audio and helps minimize background noise. For best listening purposes, I recommend using headphones, but if you do not have headphones, using your computer's speakers at a respectable volume will do just fine. If you'd like, you can dial in to listen from your phone at the number on your screen. During today's webinar, I will be monitoring the chat and question box, so please feel free to ask your questions here, and I will try my best to answer them. All questions that are for the panel, please preface these with the capital letters PD for panel discussion and a colon followed by your question. If you have questions for specific panelists, please follow the same procedure, but with the panelists' initials. All right. My name is Christopher Bodner, and I'm a Sustainability Training Coordinator, AmeriCorps Vista, here at the Arizona Food Bank Network. My role is to develop trainings just like this to help your network build their capacity so that they can continue to serve food insecure Arizonans long into the future. Joining us today is our keynote speaker, Ben Burke from Manzanita Outreach. Ben works on community engagement at Manzanita Outreach. Ben has a BS in Integrated Marketing Communications and an MBA in Entrepreneurial Studies from Washington University in St. Louis. Our panelists today are Rhonda Oliver from Hands On Greater Phoenix. Rhonda has been working with Hands On Greater Phoenix for the last 20 years. Their mission is to put volunteers to work where they are needed most throughout Phoenix metropolitan area. Hands On has a network of 24,000 individual volunteers and 100+ companies. Grace Bishara from United Food Bank. Grace is a corporate engagement and volunteerism manager for United Food Bank. Grace has a bachelor's in nonprofit leadership and a certified nonprofit professional. Her past experience has been with Habitat for Humanity, where she managed a volunteer base of 12,000. Jennifer Gonzalez from St. Mary's Food Bank. Jennifer has been working with the St. Mary's Food Bank volunteer engagement team since 2012 and has been managing the volunteer program since 2015. Prior to working with St. Mary's Food Bank, she worked with the American Cancer Society Relay for Life events and led volunteers to put on different fundraising events throughout Arizona. Stacy Oliver from Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona. Stacy has served as the Volunteer Services Manager for Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona for 3 years. Previously, she has fulfilled community outreach roles with homeless and housing services and AmeriCorps programs in the southeastern United States, including volunteer and member recruitment, placement, and retention. Today's agenda will include going over a few quick updates. After those updates, I will hand it off to Ben, who will dive into our training for today. We will open it up for a minute or two after Ben's presentation for any questions you might have about his training topic. We will then dive into a panel discussion with volunteer program experts who will have the best insight on how to tackle today's need of volunteers during this pandemic. At the end of the presentation, you will find resources and tools that will be useful to help strengthen your volunteer program. As a result, as well as contact information for the panelists and speakers. So, we are the Arizona Food Bank Network, formerly known as the Association of Arizona Food Banks. We recently went through a name and branding change. However, our overall vision and mission have stayed the same. Our vision, a hunger-free Arizona. Our mission, develop solutions to end hunger through food banking, public policy, and innovation. We are a nonprofit organization serving 5 food bank members and a network of nearly 1,200 food pantries and agencies. AZFBN is one of the first state associations in the nation and an inaugural partner of State Association of Feeding America. AZFBN was instrumental in the development of a statewide gleaning project, and our advocacy efforts have brought about beneficial state and federal legislation for our member food banks and the people they serve. Now that you know a little bit about who we are, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the current situation that we are all living in today. COVID-19 has altered all of our lives, as well as the lives of many of our clients that we serve. I want to recognize all of those who have or are currently battling the virus. Whether that is you or someone you know, we hope that you or they have a speedy recovery and end up back in the arms and safety of loved ones. The last update that I want to share with you is, as of now, the Arizona National Guard has ended their support mission on July 31st, 2020. However, they are still taking support request submissions as they have hopes to extend their mission. I do want to mention that there is no guarantee of this. Even though their support mission may be extended, we know that they will not be around forever. Because of this, I believe that today's training will in fact set you up for success and allow you to prepare to bring volunteers back to your agency. This last update is a perfect segue to bring in our keynote speaker, Ben Burke, to present his training topic on strengthening your volunteer program.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chris. Can you guys hear me okay? Or Chris, can you just confirm you can hear me?
Yes, Ben, yes, I can definitely hear you. Thanks for joining us today.
Okay, awesome. Well, yeah, great to be here, everybody. Definitely an honor to speak to you all today on this topic. When Chris asked us to do this, it caused us to reflect a bit on our volunteer strategy, particularly recruitment. And one of the things we realized very quickly is we've never really recruited any volunteers in any sort of traditional way that we might think about recruitment. And so Chris and I talked through this, and we decided today what would be best to share here was not so much a step-by-step checklist, a how-to of things to do, but more so a sharing of a bit of philosophy, a bit of some of the higher level things that we do at Manzanita Outreach that we think have been very instrumental in us having what we consider a successful organization, inclusive of a successful volunteer program. So to level set, this training is not, again, intended to be take down every note and these are the steps to take, but more so a sharing of different ideas and concepts and strategies that we have done and we know others have done that have been successful, both within the food assistance provider sort of landscape as well as outside of it. Another disclaimer that I would say is we're not discussing here more so particular strategies relative to social distancing or any sort of health regulations relative to volunteer management. We decided that was a topic that all of us have probably quite a bit of information on, but more so into where we think we can get a little bit more value. And so yeah, there we go. So Manzanita Outreach, I'll just start here. We are located in the Verde Valley. We are now serving all of Yavapai County in various forms of food assistance. We have a vision where all people in the world have their basic life needs met. And our mission, that which we build our programs upon, is to share the abundance of resources within our communities with dignity, with joy, and without any judgment. And so a small background, a brief story, we started around 2011 as essentially a one-time per year meal packing event for a sister city in Haiti, whereby we purchased food through a partner organization, brought that bulk food into a large facility. At that time, solicited volunteers to come in for one day to pack a large amount of food, and then through a partnership, got that food to our sister city in Haiti. And this was essentially an outreach of a particular church in the Verde Valley in Cottonwood. And in 2017, when a new executive director came in, his name is Mike Newcomb. Mike had a background in supply chain and logistics and a bit more what you might call kind of mainstream business sort of strategy. And one of those tools that Mike used early in 2017 was a gap analysis. And that is to say, looking around the local landscape and saying, where are there opportunities to be of value here with regard to food assistance? And through a variety of different methods, determined that there were gaps in time and location and stigma relative to people receiving enough healthy food to eat, relative to food insecurity. And so the solution that was brought forth through that research and discussions was a mobile food pantry. A food distribution system that wasn't reliant upon one particular location and wasn't reliant upon one particular time, and one that perhaps had a different feeling, one that was more so looking at the idea of sharing food because there was an abundance of food. And so these were some of the ideas that started in 2017. And through multiple iterations of how to distribute food, and primarily through community partnerships and other partnerships, including St. Mary's Food Bank, today, Manzanita Outreach is now a top 10 volume food assistance provider in Arizona. So going from nothing in 2017 to this year, we will be over 2 million pounds of food distributed in our region. Has been tremendous growth. And again, tomorrow, what we're looking for and what we're working on is moving into countywide, which we have begun, really developing and sharing the model that we've created, and moving into all basic needs, transcending simply food, but looking at food as the core connector of everything that we do to provide some degree of security for our neighbors. And all of this was possible because of volunteers. And although we started in 2011 with what you might call kind of traditional recruitment, going to schools, going to friends and family, going to churches, and asking for volunteers, very much since 2017, there has been no formal volunteering recruitment. Yet we have, pre-COVID, over 100 people volunteering on a monthly basis in some form or another. And then post-COVID, still very high numbers and very high engagement. And so I'll talk a little bit about my story here and how this ties into how I got involved, and very much a microcosm. So again, my name's Ben. I moved to Arizona from St. Louis, Missouri a few years ago, 2018, and was very much drawn to the area and drawn to the idea of the spirituality and living in the unknown, and had basically given up my career in St. Louis to explore particular ideas of spirituality, coming to Sedona, and very quickly found myself in a place where I was unable to provide the basic needs for my own family. I have a family of 4, 2 young children, and found myself considering a food bank, going to a food pantry, something that I had never considered before in my life. And through a Google search, I found Manzanita Outreach online, saw their website, saw that they hosted something that they called a food sharing event. I put in a form, which was basically asking a particular question around timing, and I received a call back on my cell phone 5 minutes later from the executive director, where he invited me very personally to come to the food sharing event, say hello to him, meet the volunteers, and it was very much an unexpected thing that that I would experience. You know, moving into this space of receiving help in this way was something that was difficult for me personally. Now, went to the event, and I saw at that time, what was a farmer's market style food sharing, with food across about 50 feet of tables in a U shape, and probably about 25 volunteers and 50 to 75 people that were either receiving food, having just received food, or in line to get the food, which is a fairly short line. And it just felt different to me. I felt compelled personally to be a part of this in some way, to support this. I didn't really know Mike. I didn't really know the story of Manzanita. I didn't know the church. I didn't understand their particular beliefs. I had really just a feeling that this was a group of people that welcomed me without asking any questions about my background, about my income, about, you know, anything that really needed not be brought forth. And I was treated with an amount and type of respect that was, you know, just something I didn't plan on. And so I began to volunteer with Manzanita Outreach and offered Mike to help with marketing, help with more of the back end sort of administration. And through that work with the board of directors and volunteers and with some of the staff, eventually started working with Manzanita, which of course at that time in my life was very meaningful financially as well. And so I tell this story because it is certainly a microcosm of a central component of the philosophy of the mission, which is to share the abundance of resources with dignity, joy, and without any judgment. And into the idea that we all sit at the same table. So now being here for me, telling this story of how to recruit volunteers, being somebody that was in essence recruited to be a volunteer through simply sharing this particular type of like philosophy, is something that is a microcosm within the whole story of this. So the idea with Manzanita Outreach, and I'm trying to click forward, there we go, is we step back and we said, so why do people volunteer? And these are some of the reasons you told me. Well, it keeps me busy, it keeps me active. I enjoy coming because I'm on my feet, I get to move around, I get to have a diversity of things to do. We hear that. We also hear social engagement, and we see that as certainly one of the primary things is volunteers coming and creating friends and creating a sense of community of who's been here, who's able to tell particular stories about past events. And we have a sense of culture developing completely absent of anything that was perhaps intended or was orchestrated by staff. And we hear a sense of fulfillment. And that's, you know, one of the obvious reasons that many people volunteer is they feel a sense of purpose. They feel a sense of resonance with the mission, a sense of resonance with being able to be helpful to other people. We also hear it's fun. We also hear that this is the type of environment that's very kinetic, it's very active. You're up, you're moving around, people are smiling, they're talking to each other, they're sharing stories, we have music playing. You know, that sort of environment is something that also attracts and retains. But one of the things that we know, and we have heard very vulnerably shared by some of our longer term volunteers, is that they're a part by volunteering with Manzanita Outreach or volunteering with any organization where this would be the case, is they're a part of something that's bigger than themselves. They're participating in something that means more than perhaps just food. It means more than just building a home, you know, something to the degree of Habitat for Humanity, something more than supporting a shelter through a donation. There's a larger thing that's happening right now. And we certainly will talk a little bit about that and how to perhaps how to identify that within ourselves and within the organizations that we run. But it also then comes to an admission in some way that food and sharing food, it's a connector. It's a means to an end. Okay, and it's not to in any way downgrade the work that we do not by any stretch of the imagination, but it is to zoom out in our perspective of what it is that we do as nonprofit leaders, as leaders of basic needs for our community, and to attempt to contextualize it into a larger vision. And that's something that we believe we've done fairly well, and at least within ourselves. And then secondarily, we have done a fairly good job of articulating that to our donors, our clients, and certainly to our volunteers. So one of the things we look at is our BHAG. This is one of these kind of businessy ideas. What is your big, hairy, audacious goal? And this ties in very closely with having your volunteers be excited about what it is that you're doing, having your volunteers have this sense of being a part of something much bigger. So a BHAG, again, is big, hairy, audacious goal. In 2019, June, we sat down in the process of writing a grant. We're forced to really set some goals, really think about, okay, what are we doing here? Where do we want to be? And we set a goal in this particular grant, and therefore then in our organization, that we wanted to be a part of a solution that provided everyone in the Verde Valley, Arizona, with enough food to eat regardless of their situation. And so we didn't really know what that meant at the time. We had ideas of what would need to be created, but we didn't know everything, and we weren't really quite sure what the barriers were going to be. Well, as of today, due to many of the things we'll talk about, not the least of which is community partnerships and the ability for our food assistance provider network to work together, your food assistance provider network to work together, so long as someone is aware of a particular website that we assisted in creating called mohelp.org, we can confidently say that everyone in the Verde Valley has enough food to eat. And we can say that because of the development of particular programs to do this. And that is, of course, the mobile food pantry. It is drive-through food pantries, but it's also doing specific outreach to organizations like senior homes, senior living facilities. It is through the development of a home delivery program that is Verde Valley wide. It is through the development and cultivation of volunteers whom are able to give emergency food boxes to anyone, typically within a couple days, if not within that day. And so it's development of all these solutions, not just within our organization, but within partner organizations, and tying them together through some sort of digital and cultural infrastructure that we can confidently say, so long as somebody is aware of what it is that's happening, and we've aggregated that on a website, then they will have enough food to eat. And moving forward, we would like to expand this to Yavapai County. And with the challenges that COVID brought, we were presented the opportunity to do that and to partner with the school system in Yavapai County to be able to begin that process of what does the logistics look like to provide mass amounts of food to an entire county. And that's what we've been working on here. And so this is like our big, hairy, audacious goal. As it states today, it's not that big and that hairy as it was in 2019. But in creating this, we shared this with our volunteers before we had a plan, okay? This is part of this sort of vulnerability that really cultivates the type of trust that increases our volunteer retention, increases anyone's volunteer retention. And so we shared this goal with, I recall Mike sharing it with pretty much anyone and everyone that would listen. This is what we want to do. This is where we are going. Please come along with us. And again, as we are ramping back up with a different model right now, we're also sharing this particular goal here in Verde Valley that we're going to be moving very much into the entire county. So one of the things that's been really successful in cultivating these sort of culture, this sort of culture, is to have little mantras, little sayings, things that we stand for. Staff and key volunteers, for lack of a better way of putting this, really should be transparent in where their beliefs align and where they don't. And it's not to say that we want to only solicit those that have our belief system, not by any means. But what we do want to do is we want to be able to attract those that are in resonance with where we are going. And that doesn't happen with marketing campaigns. It doesn't happen by putting your mission statement at the top of your website. That doesn't work. What works is constant repetition and constant vulnerability with our volunteers. And so these mantras sort of developed out of research, out of talking with clients, out of stories that we would generate from our volunteers, and we would redistribute those stories. But each one of these, I think there's 6 here, come from an element of strategy as well. And so I'll just quickly go through them, and hopefully, you know, within your own organizations, the idea of identifying what are some of these little sayings that we can start to utilize in our conversations as we explain to people what it is we're doing and why we're doing it. So the first is, there's not a food problem, there's a distribution problem. And this was and is probably one of the primary differentiators, for lack of a better word, in how we are operating our food pantry. We believe, and maybe many of you can resonate with this, that there's more than enough food. Or we could say there's enough food for everybody. It's not a matter of growing more food or finding more food. It's a matter of getting the abundance of food to the right people at the right time in the right location. And so that's a distribution problem. And we since kind of crafted this and understood that there was also a stigma problem in terms of how people felt when they interacted with the idea of going to a food pantry for the first time. And so we said that was a marketing problem. But initially, this was the whole mantra for the organization. We are going to invest in a distribution model, invest our money, invest our time, invest our intellectual and creative energy to look at solutions here. And so all of that strategy was wrapped up into this, you know, very small phrase. And we would have meetings at the beginning of our volunteerships where our executive director would start the meeting with this reminder, to the point where a couple months in, we had volunteers that were finishing this sentence. They were saying, there's not a food problem, and the volunteers would say, there's a distribution problem. Right? And that was part and is part very much of this culture that we're creating. The second is, food is the connector. And we utilize that with particular volunteers and, of course, donors in articulating our vision and where we are going as an organization. We are not solely, in our minds and in our intention, a food assistance provider. That is what we are doing right now, because that is where the need is. However, as this moves forward, our hearts and our vision for supporting our neighbors are much bigger than solely food. And so we articulate that. We all sit at the same table. This is something that I said one time to the executive director's wife. And it was her name is Donna, and she's very much a huge part of this organization as well. And I recall that that resonated with her as I was reflecting on my own experience working with Manzanita, is that we're all at the same table. Whether you're a donor, whether you're a client, whether you're staff, whether you're a food assistance provider or not, we're all sitting at the same table. And that sort of mentality can begin to reduce this idea of stigma, this idea of helping the needy. These sort of ways that maybe traditionally we've looked at food assistance, and we're looking to break that, and we're looking to shift into just seeing everyone as very much equal in that way. Bringing communities together, that's something that we've heard now recently from some of our partners. Sharing food, again, just the particular usage of words, you know, we very selectively call ourselves a food pantry because of the stigma associated with it. Instead of defining us by a label, we are a food pantry, what we tend to want to do is tell people what we're doing. We share food. So make it much more kind of an activity and not as a label with a particular connotation or definition. And then, of course, filling the gaps. That was what we did to identify, and what we continue to do as an ongoing process to identify these things. So the exercise that would be suggested here is to really look at your organization, your strategy, what is perhaps different or perhaps unique in some way, and looking at the culture and trying to pull out particular, again, I'm using the word mantra, but particular reinforcements of the direction that you're going and the culture that you're attempting to create. So again, we've not recruited a single volunteer in any sort of tradition in many years. Everything has come to us through word of mouth, through clients becoming volunteers, staff finding volunteers, volunteers just kind of showing up on the website. Again, part of this digital infrastructure, which I'll talk about, is making it easy for someone to volunteer. So it's about attracting them, and this is the idea that we're wanting to share is think about how you can attract someone to your organization who aligns with you. And right now, people are looking for opportunities, and especially right now, looking for a place where they can be part of a solution, a place where there is no particular kind of dogmatic belief system around this is the right way or that is the right way, but more so a focus on let's provide a solution, let's take action. Part of this attraction to these particular opportunities is to align with an organization that does more doing than talking, right? Does more demonstration of what it is that they care about and what it is that they are in the business of doing than they do simply talking about it. And that's a focus on the mission, focus on actually doing it. And when this organization was really started to take off, there was a very keen attention to the culture and really focusing on the culture first, because the culture in our organizations that we run, that is way harder to change than the operations. Okay, culture is something that very difficult to shift the direction of. Operations, as we're all experiencing, that can shift. We go from a farmer's market, COVID happens, 2 weeks later, we got to go to drive-through. We got to figure it out, right? And if you have the right culture, if you have the right mentality, if you've attracted the right people, you can shift into any direction that you need to shift, because it's not about farmer's market style. It's not about the particular activity. It's about the vision. It's about the mission. And you want to be attracting volunteers that are in alignment with the core belief system or the core kind of feeling, more so than you want to have a skills list going out and finding volunteers who can lift 40 to 60 pounds, repeatedly for 3 hours, right? That those people will come if we're in alignment with our own core values. And then again, it's about making it expansive. And I'll say this in a couple different ways, but it's about reminding yourself first as the leaders of your organization, and then authentically sharing that with the volunteers, that this is a spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical process. You're not just looking for physicality with a volunteer. You're not looking for somebody just to come as a sack of muscles to move that thing over to there 70 times and that's it, right? That's very physical. That's certainly not any sense of spiritual or aspirational. So make it expansive, not in a sense of inauthenticity, but as much as we can do to cultivate an environment that is wholly actually serving the volunteer in their mental, emotional, and however you would call spiritual development, that is going to be a far more attractive opportunity for somebody to donate their time to than comparatively simply moving boxes or simply taking down registration. Okay, and so how do we articulate that externally? Well, in a marketing sense, it's your brand, and it's not meant to be, this word brand is not meant to connotate any sort of inauthenticity. It's just, what are you known for? If you went out and randomly polled 50 people in your community and you ask them, what is my organization known for? What is insert organization name known for? What do you think about them? What sort of responses are you going to get? Right? If you asked your community, how are you different? How are you unique? Again, with the lens of client first, not from the lens of donations or finances, but how are you different in what you do? and how it is that you do it to serve your community. How are you unique? And it's not to say that you need to have a model that is so different as Manzanita's is, but it certainly elaborates that point of finding that niche, doing something that is just slightly different, right? Even if we just shifted the mentality of what we did with regard to sharing food, that in and of itself could make you very unique in your area. And this is not coming from a sense of like competition for resources. It's coming from a sense of connecting with your volunteers' hearts and connecting with their minds so that they can actually remember you, right? That's the idea of the brand, is just, being top of mind. And again, part of your brand development is to look at what are the feelings, what are the emotions that volunteers have when they're working with you. How does your community perceive you that's on the outside, and how does your volunteer base perceive you on the inside? And is there dissonance there, right? Do you have a core volunteer base that feels completely different than the general community, right? If you do, then perhaps there's an opportunity there to look at marketing or awareness or some degree of a campaign to educate your community on what it is that you do and why it should be important for them. So again, looking at then a culture that attracts. It's expansive. It's more than just each box of food that's shared. It's about the bigger, broader mission. And then, for much of the rest of this presentation too, including a logic model, which ties our activities, the things that we do, to the outcomes. One of the things that we know is the fastest way to get a volunteer to be disinterested from working with our organization is to allow them to think the work that they do doesn't matter. The moment that a volunteer thinks that, they're done, right? And that's hard to undo. That's part of the culture. Conversely, when you set up your value chain, or kind of like all the things that need to happen for your organization to do the things that it does, the actual activities, of course, are necessary for the outcomes, but we don't always articulate that so clearly to the volunteers. It's kind of assumed. And so with this particular tool, a logic model, which I'll go through an example later on, it can be a powerful tool to remind ourselves and to therefore then remind our volunteers. Sharing in ownership, that is part of this attracting culture. So when you have successes and you're sharing them, you're giving the particular success, you're giving the credit to the volunteers. And it's, again, it's the idea of just removing the ego, removing the idea that leadership supports, the leadership is in some way supported by volunteers. And we use an inverse kind of pyramid, and I'll show that in just a minute. Within our own minds, we want to try to replace competition with collaboration. And we want to try to replace drama with consistency. Many times in volunteer cultures are fraught with drama. Particular, sort of cliques can form, particular sort of inconsistencies of communication, information asymmetry. Some people know of opportunities, other people don't, and that creates this sense of kind of stress that can level up into a drama, into stories that we have a tendency to kind of tell ourselves. And we're all susceptible to that, but certainly, volunteers whom are just doing this, in many cases, from their own perspective, they believe they're doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. Any sniffing of inconsistencies of information or favoritism, that sort of thing, that's not going to feel good. So it's being very kind of clear in your communication. This is kind of the traditional model that most people were taught at some point, that this is how organizations are built, that we have clients, we have neighbors. If you're a for-profit business, you have customers, right, that are down here at the bottom. You have your staff or volunteer group, you have your leads, your kind of support leads, you have your mid-level management, and you have your leadership. And in a nonprofit, like we have, this is sort of, using this terminology, that the leadership is up here at the top, supported by everything else. And if we just say, no, the leadership, we're here to support you. We're here to support the staff, the volunteer leads, the operating volunteer group, and at the top of our pyramid is those that we serve. Every single one of us is here to increase the optimum outcomes of our beneficiaries, right? And so this is something that we refer back to when we make decisions, and certainly something we refer back to when we have any sense of conflict within ourselves or within a volunteer. We remember that we're here to serve them, not the other way around. So another mantra that this is, not of our own creation, but something that we've adopted is to say, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So quote from Wayne Dyer. And there's been many examples in this organization that, could bring that up, but wanted to point out a few that we have seen ourselves moving through. Instead of moving and serving others from perhaps a sense of desperation or a sense of lack, a sense of saving, it's looking at the idea of expressing your passion and mission to serve the community, and the volunteers then at that point come to you. Okay, so it's moving from a paradigm of people need this organization to a paradigm of this is a joy to provide this service. And although that might seem very small, it is immensely valuable in communicating what it is that you do to volunteers. Inviting other volunteers to feel as if their program that you're running was theirs and not yours. Again, this is also the idea of sharing the credit. The organization that I was with prior to Manzanita Outreach also did this very well, and we took out newspaper advertisements thanking our volunteers, and when we would have particular news articles run about our organization, instead of the leadership giving the quotes, we had our volunteers give the quotes. A newspaper would call us and say, hey, congratulations on whatever this award was. Do you have a quote? I would go into the bank of volunteers and find somebody who would just be overjoyed to give a quote to the newspaper, right? So it's sharing that spotlight. So allow for your best volunteers to define their own roles and utilize their skills. And I'm using the word best kind of in air quotes here, but it's the volunteers that step up and go above and beyond, and allowing a bit of autonomy for those leaders, for those people that really want to move into a sense of leadership. Give them perhaps a little bit more autonomy to do that. And as others step up and see that more autonomy is being given there will be a natural sense of desiring to be creative within themselves. And then you're looking at a situation where you're developing leaders and not followers. And finally, give them the freedom to pursue arising challenges. These going on. They're the ones that are in touch with the process, with the systems, and with the clients. And so providing that consistent feedback loop in order for them to actually articulate to you something that they're noticing, and then allowing them to develop a solution through their own experience, that can be really powerful. And that's very much different than most organizations are running. And Chris, I'm attempting to move the screen here. There we go. So food assistance providers right now have a real profound opportunity to move from scarcity to abundance. COVID-19 provides us really a once in a lifetime, let's hope, opportunity to be societal leaders of change in a world where people are looking for leadership, are craving sound, trustworthy leadership. So it's not about food. It's about leadership. It's about presence. It's about love. It's about hope, faith, dignity. It's about these other more intrinsic things that we all can connect with. Okay, and that is a total paradigm shift for probably many people in terms of how they define their role as an executive director or as a volunteer manager for a food pantry, right? If we can shift ourselves collectively into this space of perceiving ourselves as leaders and taking on that responsibility without the ego, but just with the true understanding of what's going on right now, we're going to be able to make really incredible change. So some notes on volunteer management. spoiling the volunteers with value, appreciation, and opportunity. We do this in person and certainly with updates. We share progress since the last meeting. And so one of the things that we've done is we gather people together. We say, hey, it's been 1 week or 1 month since we got together. Here's exactly what we've been working on. Here's, here's the data and here's the stories, right? Let me get you up to date because it's important. We also send out frequent communications via email, kind of as a volunteer update on the organization. Again, letting them into your decision. So when you have a particular decision that you're making around your organization, ask for advice. Another fundraising little mantra that has stuck with me from a previous life is, and I know this isn't fundraising, but it's important to bring this up here. When you want advice, ask for money. When you want money, ask for advice. And money can also be replaced with, service, right? When you're looking for service, you're looking for input and kind of connection, ask for advice. Let people in on your decisions. Again, speak from the heart, share your joys, share your fears, let people in on where you are right now. If you don't have a plan for how to address a particular problem, tell them. Tell your volunteers, this is how I'm approaching this. I don't have a solution yet. I would love any input that you have, but here's where I'm at. And again, it's the idea of not posturing, excuse me, not attempting to elevate ourselves because we're in some semblance of position of leadership. So I know I'm going a little bit over on time, so I'll move through these relatively quickly, but these are some additional notes, excuse me, on what we would call management, which again, it's not really about management. It's more so about just cultivating culture. But we talked about the mantra. We talked about the leadership versus followers. Working towards solving a problem, that's a really big one, so that your volunteers know what it is that you're doing, like why it's necessary that your organization be in existence. And we'll go through a logic model and then consider how this affects how you schedule your volunteers and whether you are having sort of a fixed schedule or if you are allowing flexibility in that schedule. Okay, just one moment. It's attempting to go to the next page. There we go. Now, prior to COVID, for our scheduling, we never scheduled volunteers. We simply let people know when there was an opportunity, and whoever showed up, we worked with. And of course, after COVID, that we're now kind of shifting back in that direction a bit. We're designing schedules based on the client and volunteers' needs, not based on staff and leadership. Again, thinking about the inverted triangle, and truly trying to remember as best we can, every volunteer that we get is a blessing. It is a mini miracle that somebody has decided to volunteer their time. So showing that sense of appreciation to them is important. So we'll go through infrastructure. Here's some of the things that are perhaps even more tactile than what we've discussed: physical and process infrastructure, digital infrastructure, and then cultural infrastructure. So we take a lot of this, kind of like mindset, philosophy, definitional, culture building stuff, and like, what do we actually do? So then we apply that mentality to the organization, right? So then we look around and we say, is the space that we have ideal to facilitate our mission, to do what it is that we say we're going to do, right? Are we willing to make upgrades? Are we open to receiving resources in order to make those upgrades? We look at our processes and we say, okay, I'm looking at my volunteers. Is there anything from their eyes that can be simplified? Is there anything in your organization that is done just because it's the way that it's always been done? That's always a red flag, right? when we look at sort of processes, it's just always done that way. So really look for those things and be open to change, be open to evolving something with a different perspective. And then of course, we're looking at efficiency, we're looking at effectiveness, we're looking at a way in which we can get a feedback loop going from our volunteers, a feedback form that said, how is your experience, right? Fill out this form, 1 to 5. How was your experience volunteering with us this week, right? Start to cultivate that feedback loop so that you can improve your client relations and your volunteer experiences. Digital infrastructure. So again, this is probably something you're not expecting to see, but it's, as you know, critically important for volunteers. Who's responsible for managing the volunteer database? How do you collect data? What data do you collect? How do you keep it private? What software are you using to do this effectively? You know, we're utilizing a particular CRM called Little Green Light, and we invest a lot of time and energy into our website, into the forms, into our CRM, our customer relationship management software, so that it's very easy, or at least relatively easy, when we want to get information, kind of quantitative information for our, perhaps we're writing a grant, perhaps we're looking to tell a story, perhaps we are moving to a place where we want to recruit more volunteers and we want to be able to talk about who our volunteers actually are. And we can also look at things like, how many hours are people working? What is the frequency that somebody is working? What's the age that we have? How has that age changed over time? And when you're working with hundreds of volunteers, that sort of data becomes available. When you're working with you know, sub 50, or you know, in that range, it's more about just very clear communication. So one of the values of a CRM is to be able to log conversations. Okay, so being able to actually go in there and say, hey, you know, writing a note tagging this particular volunteer saying, I talked with this volunteer today and they were getting quite tired after 2 hours. Or I talked to this volunteer yesterday and she suggested this change in our process, right? You can start to actually remember these things. And again, I come from, you know, somewhat of like a sales background, and this would be a tactic to cultivate an authentic relationship with somebody that you're working with, because sometimes we forget. We've got a million things going on, and the digital infrastructure for volunteers, easy for them to sign up, easy for you to catalog all the information, inclusive of conversations, inclusive of data. It's one more thing that you don't have to rely on kind of analog processes if that's what you're desiring. And then finally, this cultural and value infrastructure. And this is where we're going to get into the logic model. It's into answering the questions, what do you believe? And how are you making it easy to articulate that to your volunteers? Do you understand your organizational model enough to explain it in simplified terms? So to explain something in simplified terms, we really have to know it, which means we have to understand it perhaps in a more complicated way. So I'm going to show you this next slide, and I don't want it to scare everybody away. This is a logic model that we developed for our organization about a year ago. So some of it's a bit out of date, but I wanted to use this because it was the most expansive one that we had. And this is a tool, it's a management tool for an organization to understand how they perceive what's going on right now, what they plan to put in and do in order to create a change, and what sort of change is going to be anticipated. Okay, that's the situation, inputs, activities, and then outputs and outcomes. Okay, and then we catalog things like what assumptions we have and what are the external factors that may be out of our control. So here in the situation, I'm just going to go through this, but the idea is, again, to consider doing this for your organization. It is a profoundly helpful resource for you to clearly know what business are you in, why are you in that business, and therefore then more easily and authentically demonstrate to your volunteers through your words and your actions kind of what you believe. So the situation is what's going on. This is collecting data. You know, we have some food insecurity data here from a year ago. We have perceptional kind of understanding. There is a lack of convenient access to food distribution locations. That was one. It's kind of like, most of the time, it's the problem that you're trying to solve. Then you're going to say, like, at a high level, what are you going to put in to do this, right? You're going to have some management time. You're going to be doing some publicity and promotion. You're going to be managing volunteers, and then you have the resources. That's the food, that's the materials, training coordination, internal documentation, a truck, a forklift, staff, all these things. You list out all of the inputs, all of the things that you are putting into the equation. Okay, what are the elements of this? And then you say, okay, what are the things we're actually going to do? What are the core activities that we're going to do? In our case, we said database application and referral structuring. This is a precursor to mohelp.org. This was our idea of a shared sort of database where food assistance providers could work together. Then we have, the actual food sharing program where we're utilizing our truck and we're utilizing our volunteers. And then we have the marketing, right? Where we see that as a critical need in the community. Okay, and so those are the things that we are doing. Then we have outputs here. These are the direct results. So these are kind of like things that we can measure for the most part. This is usually quantitative. So these are in some ways tied to goals. We're going to say we want to do this number of things. And then these last three also can be looked at impacts, right? So like with outputs, it's like, hey, we're going to have 2,000 households receiving a physical directory. This was part of this original idea of MoHelp. We turned to digital. Over 5,000 residents receiving food assistance and 1,200 receiving home deliveries. These were some of our very quantitative goals. And as a result of those, if those and when those are achieved, what's going to happen downstream? And I won't go through all of this, but going through this exercise, this is where you get to the ability to talk to your volunteers about why you're doing this, right? Why putting food in this box creates increased behavioral health outcomes, increased health of residents in our community, decreased chronic medical conditions, right? A lot of these things that you can statistically validate that are again logically connected. This is a logic model. If this, then that. If this, then that. All the way to what are the highest level kind of outcomes that we can have. And then we place in our assumptions. What are we assuming is going to continue, that we're going to continue to get food, that we're going to continue to have volunteers. And then what are things that are out of our control? Well, we didn't have COVID on here, but we did have natural disaster. We had emergencies, right? So these are things that, because we were in this mindset, this model of focusing on value, focusing on the why of what we're doing, we have grown immensely due to COVID. We have expanded and been presented with opportunities to be of service to our community in a way that we couldn't have even imagined it. And then on the back end, once you have this set up, it's the idea of like, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And many may disagree with that, and I in some ways do disagree with that sometimes. But it is a mentality of if you can see progress week over week, month over month, year over year, you're much more equipped to be able to identify which activities that you're doing are able to be optimized. Okay, and so you're looking for opportunities to become more present with a volunteer, learning their story. Again, data is not just numbers, it's also stories. How do we make it easy for people to register? How are you going to organize these stories and this numerical data that you collect? And then just as importantly, how do you share it? We all have perhaps seen an organization that has immense amount of data, but they're not telling that story. They're not speaking to those things to their community. And so these are all questions to kind of ask ourselves as we're looking to increase our effectiveness. And so this is just an output. This is part of our demonstration of how we tell this story. Here, now this is much easier to see when it's printed, but essentially this is telling the story of Manzanita Outreach in terms of the number of pounds of food shared, the number of food share visitors. This is family visits, or what we call a family visit, and then the dollar value of food. And down here at the bottom, we have our definitions utilizing Feeding America's particular assumptions in there. But this tells a pretty clear story. You don't need to be, incredibly, academically minded to understand up and to the right, we're growing. You know, Manzanita Outreach is growing. It's $5 million, over $5 million, we estimate. It'll be much more than that, but for the purpose of this, you know, presentation, we kept it conservative. In economic value, this is 2 million. We've got extra 2 zeros to make this equivalent. So by the end of this year, this year itself, we will serve over 2 million pounds of food, right? And we have that backed up on Excel sheets, and every single you know, every single event that we have, we know exactly all of these numbers and many, many more, so that we're able to easily just go, you know, export that data into a form like this, into a graph like this, and we can easily visually tell that story. And so one of the things, again, as we've reflected, that has allowed us to do this, if not the most important thing outside of some of the philosophy, is community partnerships. And community partnerships come about in our experience in many ways because of a sense of collaboration, not of a sense of competition. So some of the things, the process, for lack of a better word, that we go through in looking at partnerships is, are the incentives aligned? So what does this organization care about? Where can I add value to this organization? But what do they already care about? What is their mission? What, in addition to just the organization, many times we have a particular contact. We have a principal of a school, we have a superintendent of a school, we have a youth pastor of a church, right? We have an outreach coordinator for a social group, right? These sort of community organizations. It's not just understanding what the organization cares about, it's also understanding what that person cares about. Okay, so what is that person paid to do, right? That's part of it. And then getting to know that particular person, what do they care about? It can help them. How can we add value to their organization, right? So that's kind of on the front end. And then, you know, on the back end, you need to be really clear on what you need. Nobody wants to have an influx of 24 volunteers that you don't have anything for them to do on a Tuesday, because your food activities are on a Wednesday, right? You don't need a half dozen volunteers to do something you already have 24 that are lined up to do. So being very clear and articulate, speaking to what you need, and not being afraid to say no. You know, no, that actually doesn't work with our model. That's part of building trust in community partnerships. And then, of course, part of this discussion was also, you know, how do you focus on younger participants? Well, what is going to attract a younger participant? Well, you know, what attracts many of the younger participants to Manzanita Outreach is the flexibility, more so than even some of the culture ideas, is the idea that they can do different tasks at different times, right? And the way that we have kind of set it up, they're not always coming in doing the exact same thing every week. We have structured it many times in many ways where they move around. Now, that's not always the case, but younger participants are typically wanting to have a little bit more flexibility, and they're going to want to have a little bit more diversity. And so then, you know, you're looking at schools, you're looking at the youth groups at the churches, and you're looking, you know, if you are thinking about a more traditional recruitment strategy, the idea would be not to think so much about this big campaign of how do you market this, but the suggestion is, Chris and I went through these discussions, and Chris and Alexander have had many conversations with many of you. It's perhaps one of my big learnings in working with this organization is the value of just picking up the phone and calling. That is something that I have learned through this experience is immensely differentiated in the world of text messages and emails. The ability to just pick up the phone, for lack of a better word, cold call somebody, introduce yourself, tell them with passion what you're doing and what you're looking for, and ask them to talk to the right person. That can be immensely valuable and immediately giving us a return on a referral for somebody who may be interested. So the youth groups, the community organizations that focus on, you know, service, kind of direct service organizations, and then, you know, of course, the schools, those are great places to go. Yeah, and then I think this was kind of a rearticulation of this last point, which again is just, you know, it's not in the food assistance world. What I've learned is there is a perceived competition for volunteers, somewhat, competition for clients, somewhat, um, certainly a perceived competition for dollars, and perhaps a competition for credit, for being the one that has done the work, or rather than done the work, achieved the results. And so, although what we do, we think is very important, and we think very highly of what we have built, we also know that it's nothing without community partnerships, without our other food assistance providers in our area. We would not be able to achieve our goals. So as much as we are able to move from a sense of trying to get a slice of the limited pie sort of mentality in any of those areas, inclusive of volunteerism, is to reconstruct the way that we're thinking into collaboration, is to looking for opportunities to work with other food assistance providers, with other businesses, with groups of volunteers, and really opening up our minds to receive support. We're going to be able to be more receptive to receive these resources. And, you know, we don't have time, I don't think I've already gone over, to go into the miracles upon miracles upon miracles that we have seen in our organization by focusing on philosophy, for lack of a better word, philosophy, by focusing on our mindset. By doing that, we have an experiential sort of evidence that is concrete and is basically unshakable, that if we can expect miracles, if we can embrace resources, will show up. We don't know how, we don't know when, but they will show up. And if we can embrace that sort of mentality and demonstrate that to our volunteers, we're going to make kind of this much bigger ripple effect in our communities than can even be quantified with pounds of food and number of events and dollar value into the community, those sort of things. So, okay, that's everything I had to share. I'm sorry if I went a little bit over, but yeah, yeah, hopefully that was valuable. Happy to answer any questions.
Perfect. Awesome. Thanks, Ben. I do appreciate it. And that was wonderful information. I am going to skip your question and answers for now, just because we did go over a little bit of time. But can they direct any questions to your email?
Of course.
Absolutely. Perfect. And I'll have that up at the end of the slide here. I do want to give some time. I know, like Ben had said, we're a little over here, but I want to give some time to the panelists. Unfortunately, Rhonda Oliver had to jump off because of time. But she did say that please, any questions that you guys have that Hands-On Greater Phoenix can help out with, send her an email, and they are happy to do that. I'm going to dive right in, just so you guys know a little bit. Please preface any questions that you have for the panel with PD, or if you have a specific question for somebody, please put their initials. I'm going to just hand off general questions to each one of the panelists individually, so that way they each have a moment to speak and answer some of your questions, and then we'll kind of finish up and wrap up. I'm going to kick it off with one of the first questions, and Grace, I have you on my number one to ask first. So I hope you're ready. Hopefully we can hear you. I'll ask the question. Given the knowledge that the National Guard will be ending on the 31st, that their support is, hopefully they don't, but if it does, what information or knowledge can you recommend to our network of food agencies who will immediately need volunteers?
Hey, thanks for having me on here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right, perfect. So yeah, we've been working with the National Guard this entire time, which has been amazing. And we did put in for just in case they do extend it. But what we did is partner with the city of Mesa, and we partnered with their employees because, you know, obviously there's been the shutdown. So Parks and Recs, employees didn't really have much to do. And so we were able to partner with them and keep them working while also volunteering. So definitely partnering with, you know, local community. Also, you know, we shared the resources. So not only are they recruiting for volunteers, but we're also sharing their link as well to help them recruit in replacement of the National Guard. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks for answering that one. I'm going to go ahead and I don't have any questions in my bank yet. Please, if you guys are listening and have any questions, go ahead and send those our way. But my next question then is going to be for Jennifer. I do have a few more listed here. What type of volunteer positions, if any, do you think are most efficient to perform remotely or at home? And how do you think that can be monitored for some of these agencies that are, in the rural areas or things like that might not have that access to internet or things like that? If not, if that's a little too difficult, then obviously, how is that monitored in the urban areas?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. Okay, yeah, so what we are suggesting for virtual volunteer opportunities is we are having some people make little positive note cards, and then we're sticking them when we're giving out and we're serving our families, we're giving them these notes when we pack their cards up. So they've made note cards for us, and then also there's been different people who have put on neighborhood food drives, and then they're bringing all of the food to us. So those have been the two main things, and then obviously fundraising's always a big one. If they ever want to collect donations, that's another thing to do. But those have been our three that we've been focusing on.
Wonderful. Perfect. Thank you very much, Jennifer, for sharing. Let's see, Stacy, I do have a question here for you. Somebody says, we rely on volunteers to keep our doors open. What can I do to be sure we continue to serve the food insecure in my area?
Can you repeat the last part of that question for me?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. What can I do to be sure we continue to serve the food insecure in my area?
Sure. I can tell you at least what's going on a little bit in Tucson. We have definitely, and I'm sure most people across the network have noticed, like a very definite decrease in corporate or group volunteering. But we've actually been really fortunate in that we've seen a lot of individuals wanting to come out and volunteer. So I think maybe keeping that in mind, that like individuals might be a better population to reach out to. I know that internally for us, we've been reaching out to folks who we know have been coming on before COVID-19 hit at our location, and I'm sure it varies from place to place. We're only just now trying to start reintegrating volunteers. And so, yeah, we started with our individuals who we knew had like a regular volunteer position with us, and then we're also reaching out to some of the people who came out at really high numbers right at the beginning of the pandemic before we really had to close things down. But I know that may be circumstantial and helpful to some, but not others. But I hope that helps. Look for ways to invite individuals in rather than groups.
Absolutely, perfect. Thank you. All right, I have one that's kind of going to be open for everybody. Wendy, we'll just kind of go down the line as the way we started. So we'll go back with Grace, and then we'll kind of just use the same question for the three of you. And then for the sake of time, we'll probably do one more. Let's see here. We have what messaging can we use that is safe to come back? That it's, that you guys or maybe agencies can use to say, hey, we're good. We're following these kind of lines. What do you think may be best to reach out to those volunteers to make sure that they are safe and ready to come back?
So we relied a lot on media, of course, inviting the news channels out, inviting any kind of source that can spread the news, our social media, sharing stories on our Instagram or Facebook, making sure people see that everyone's wearing masks, everyone's taking temperatures, they're washing hands. Also letting people know that we've been paying extra to provide more cleaning services for, usually we have like a cleaning company maybe once a week, but we have someone coming in now a couple times a week, as well as our volunteers actually taking and sanitizing everything. So they see it for themselves. They see that we're checking temperatures and everything and sending people home if there isn't, if they have like a higher temperature. So just doing those things and getting the word out. Social media is probably the best way, I would say.
Perfect. Yeah, Jennifer, Stacy, do you have any comment or add on to make for that one?
I'm Jennifer, and yeah, we're pretty much doing the same thing as Grace, doing the temperature checks. We lowered the number of volunteers that we're now taking, and we have everyone spaced 6 feet apart when we're working on the production line. And we also have a sanitation crew here Monday through Friday that's keeping our volunteer areas clean like all throughout the day. And then we do the temperature checks, gloves, and masks as well. And I post everything on our website just so volunteers are aware of what we're doing.
Perfect.
Yeah, similar to the other panelists, we have been doing our distribution outside to make it as contactless as possible, so that it's a drive-through distribution. We haven't actually integrated volunteers back into our production lines quite yet, and I think because it's been kind of tentative about how long the Guard will stay, we've been prioritizing volunteers being reincorporated into distribution rather than back in the bill for now. But I think that some of the things that we've really tried to think through on my team is how do we like embed our safety expectations around COVID-19 into our like procedures for checking people in. And we also have a online scheduling site where we're able to keep one page specifically where we update volunteers on like what are the volunteering conditions, and what are the safety precautions that the food bank is taking, and also like what are the really like what are the commitments that we're asking them to make first. We had our people and culture team had all of the staff take a coronavirus training online that we were asked to do, and so we asked for their help in adapting a similar one that volunteers can take online prior to coming. So yeah, just incorporating some more safety trainings before volunteers come in, and being, even though kind of in direct conflict with some of the advice that Ben had, we are doing like a little bit more rigorous screening and test taking prior to volunteers coming in, just to ensure that safety and also to help us with the things we maybe don't have capacity to do and we need the volunteer to take responsibility for.
Definitely. Thank you for answering all of that. Last question, and then we'll kind of move on. If anybody has any questions for any of these people, I do have all emails on the end of this, at the end of this presentation. So feel free, if they're okay with it, to reach out to them. My last question here is, let's say somebody has 2 days until their distribution and they have nobody signed up on their volunteer list. What can they do? And then we'll just kind of, same thing, kind of go down the line and kind of hopefully answer for that question. So Grace, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so it definitely takes a little bit of ahead of time to make sure you're building your email list. So whenever I get group inquiries, I make sure that I am building a list of corporate groups, non-corporate groups. So maybe people that would volunteer that would be able to give financially, but also maybe youth groups, so church groups, and building those different lists of emails that you can contact, and you can do a huge email campaign and try and get that as fast as possible. Also, we worked on building a leadership team, so bringing in those core volunteers that always show up every time. Instead of calling them regular volunteers, we call them our leadership team. We got them a t-shirt. They took it so serious with that, and so whenever we really have something that we need filled and we have nobody there, you know, they fill it in an instant when we reach out to them because we make them feel important. So just building that email list is really, really important for those times.
Definitely. Hey, Jennifer, do you have anything to add on that one?
Yes, I was just going to say I started doing something. I do exactly what Grace does as well, but I also started like a 911 list. So I just started a list of contacts that will, I call them social butterflies, that'll help me find volunteers last minute, and that's helpful, or that has been helpful, because there's been a couple days where I haven't been able to fill a couple of our shifts throughout this pandemic, and I would just reach out to those like 5 people, and then, or 10 people, whatever it is you have, whoever's going to respond, and then they'll help me get some people into the door. So building like a list where those people are aware that if there's ever an emergency situation, it will be their job to step up and come help has been good, or has worked for me too.
Wonderful, wonderful. And then we'll go to Stacy.
Yeah, I'm definitely taking a lot of pages out of Grace and Jennifer's books. We also have like a lead volunteer team, so people we screened who agree to be there every week, and who take helping with recruitment pretty seriously and being on board pretty seriously. I think also, so if I were in the position where it was like 2 days away from a distribution, they don't have anybody, I would work with our distribution team to figure out like how do we make it, instead of like a 3-line distribution, how do we make it a 1-line distribution and just crank it out? How do we ask staff who are maybe staying at home to participate in all hands on deck kind of thing, and use your volunteer software to help manage the recruitment you're doing internally if it comes to it. And then I think also whether or not you have a marketing team, I think like making sure that the volunteer opportunity that you need help with is one where people can just drop in to help. If you do, if you can think about press releases and ways to use social media to ask for that help and give all the details. I think that like if people know if people know that the need is really urgent and you can push it out in those ways, sometimes you can get some really good response.
Perfect. Thank you again for joining us on the panel. To all the panelists, I really appreciate your time and for hopping on and answering some questions. Can I get, just to make sure, are all of you comfortable with any agencies or people emailing you if they have additional questions?
Yes, I'm comfortable. This is Jennifer.
This is Grace. Yeah, that's fine. I'm actually going to be hopping off here in a minute. Thank you so much for having me.
Perfect. Thank you, Grace.
And I'm available too. This is Stacy.
Perfect. Well, thank you all very much. Again, thank you for everyone for joining. I'm just going to flip through a couple of these. You will be getting the slides in an email later on. Just some resources that you can use, some from us, some from Manzanita, some from Hands-On, as well as all of your food banks are there. And then additional resources that have been found that you're more than welcome to use. These all have links, so please feel free to click on those. This is everyone's contact information. I'll leave this screen up for a little bit, but I do want to say thank you all again for joining us. I hope that you have a safe and healthy rest of your week. And thanks for being a part of the volunteer training.